Hello, a very good morning to you and a warm welcome to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine with a particular focus on the conflict in the Middle East involving Israel and Hamas of the Gaza Strip. The headlines: Palestinian supporters rally in London say they will not be silenced. UN Chief Antonio Guterres, more world leaders react to Hamas strikes in Israel and plans for a counter-strike. Plus, Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan calls on both sides to stop attacks, offers to mediate. We begin in the Middle East, and we thank you for joining us. Hundreds of protesters gathered in London to show solidarity with the Palestinian people yesterday as Israel went to war following an unprecedented attack from Hamas. Waving Palestinian flags and chanting slogans such as "We will not be silenced," protesters say the people of Palestine are the ones paying the highest price for a conflict that has been going on for decades. Fighters from Islamist group Hamas killed 700 Israelis and abducted dozens more as they attacked Israeli towns on Saturday. This is the deadliest incursion into Israeli territory since Egypt and Syria's attacks on the Yom Kippur War 50 years ago. In response, Israeli airstrikes hit housing blocks, tunnels, a mosque, and homes of Hamas officials in Gaza, killing more than 400 people, including children, in keeping with the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's vow of mighty vengeance.
We want the right to return. A lot of these, innocent civilians in Israel are considered as innocent, but however, they are settler, colonialists. This is not an equal war. They are people who occupy Gaza and the people in the West Bank. We're here because the next generation needs to understand that we will have a home to return to one day.
Of everything I've been seeing on the news, there seems to be a lot of misinformation about the actual events and who the real victims are here. It's a well-known fact that Gaza is under a blockade and has been for over 15 years. As you can see, there are a lot of people that agree that though there are atrocities being committed on both sides, it is ultimately the Palestinians that pay the highest price every time. The international community is very quick to support Israel and to make the Palestinians the enemy. But in truth, the Palestinians have been suffering far longer. And what we need is the international community to call out the illegal settlements.
That demonstration, before we go to the Justin Trudeau story, as that demonstration took place by Palestinian supporters in London, the Prime Minister of the UK, Rishi Sunak, says and condemned the attacks by Hamas in Israel. He says that he stands with Israel and the UK stands with Israel. He condemned the attacks as being barbaric and heinous. And he said that they stand with Israel, that is the UK, always and for all times. Meanwhile, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has blasted demonstrations across the country in support of the Palestinian Islamist group Hamas attack on Israel. Mr. Trudeau attended a solidarity gathering for Israel in Ottawa, where he condemned Hamas attacks in his address and affirmed Canada's support for Israel's right to defend itself. There were competing demonstrations and rallies through Monday in different groups across Canada, including Toronto, where about 1,000 protesters gathered in a demonstration organized by a group called Palestinian Youth Movement.
Of death and violence and terror has no place anywhere, including especially here in Canada. So let me be very clear. Hamas terrorists aren't a resistance. They're not freedom fighters. They are terrorists, and no one in Canada should be supporting them, much less celebrating them. Canada unequivocally and in the strongest possible terms condemns these terrorist attacks perpetrated by Hamas. We stand with Israel and reaffirm our support for Israel's right to defend itself in accordance with international law. The indiscriminate killing of civilians, the sexual violence, the violence against women, children, and elderly people, these acts are sickening and completely unimaginable. But what happened this weekend during a Jewish holiday on Shabbat was the opposite of hope. It was dark, abhorrent, and heinous. Nearly every Jewish Canadian has friends or family in Israel. My friends, you are not alone. Canadians stand with the Jewish community. Canadians stand with Israel, and we stand ready to support the Israeli people. If we want to win against terrorists, dictators, and bullies, upholding the rule of law must continue to be our rampart. Protecting civilian life must continue to be our rampart. And as you know very well, being there for one another will always be our strongest rampart against hatred. We stand with you, my friends, tonight, tomorrow, and every day.
Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. Meanwhile, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres is deeply distressed by an announcement that Israel will initiate a complete siege of the Gaza Strip following an attack by the Palestinian Islamist group Hamas over the weekend. The Israeli military announced it had called up an unprecedented 300,000 reservists and was imposing a total blockade of the Gaza Strip in response to Hamas attacks that killed hundreds of Israelis and prompted retaliatory attacks by Israel, while noting that medical equipment, food and other humanitarian supplies and personnel are needed. Mr. Guterres says that relief and entry of essential supplies into the area must be facilitated.
Let me begin by repeating my utter condemnation of the abhorrent attacks by Hamas and others against Israeli towns and villages in the Gaza periphery, which have left over 800 Israelis dead and more than 2,500 injured. Sadly, these numbers are expected to rise as the attacks are ongoing and many remain unaccounted for. In addition, over 100, possibly more, Israelis, civilians and military, have been reported captured by armed groups, including women, children, and the elderly. Some are being held hostage inside Israel, and many others have been taken inside the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad have launched thousands of indiscriminate rockets that have reached central Israel, including Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. I recognize the legitimate grievances of the Palestinian people, but nothing can justify these acts of terror and the killing, maiming, and abduction of civilians. I reiterate my call to immediately cease these attacks and release all hostages. In the face of these unprecedented attacks, Israeli airstrikes have pounded Gaza. I'm deeply alarmed by reports of over 500 Palestinians, including women and children, killed in Gaza and over 3,000 injured. Unfortunately, these numbers are rising by the minute as Israeli operations continue.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has expressed his support for the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and called for a ceasefire in the Middle East. During his weekly television show, Maduro says that followers of all religions should come together to demand for the United Nations resolutions to be respected adding that Palestinians' rights to their independence, territory, and peace should be re-established. Mr. Abbas called on the UN to immediately intervene to prevent the occurrence of a humanitarian catastrophe due to what he calls the ongoing Israeli aggression, especially in Gaza. In his words, Japan, on its part, strongly condemned the attacks against Israel by the Islamist militants. Chief Cabinet Secretary in Japan, Hirokazu Matsuno, speaking at a regular news conference, says attacks against innocent civilians could never be justified. He added that there were no reports of harm to the lives of Japanese nationals resulting from the conflict. Meanwhile, supporters of Israel in South America gathered in Buenos Aires and Santiago to show their solidarity with the Jewish state 2 days after it came under attack by Palestinian Islamist group Hamas. In Buenos Aires, thousands of people participated in a vigil organized by Argentine Jewish community holding lanterns and Israeli flags. The Jewish community in Santiago, Chile's capital, gathered at the headquarters of the Israeli Sephardic community of Chile and released white and blue balloons to call for an end to the conflict. Meanwhile, the Palestinians in Chile called on the international community to stop the conflict in the Middle East as children made placards and painted their hands red to represent the civilians killed during the conflict in the Gaza Strip. From South America to North America, New York City Mayor Eric Adams and some of the city's Jewish community leaders held a vigil on Monday in support of the victims of Hamas attacks on Israel. Adams was joined at the Golden Meir Square by rabbis, lawmakers, and Jewish activists and diplomats. The violence, which has claimed more than 1,500 lives, prompted international declarations of support for Israel over a devastating weekend attack by Hamas and appeals for an end to the fighting and protection of civilians. New York is home to the largest Jewish population outside Israel.
I am in so much pain from what I saw and what I witnessed. Nothing can justify pulling innocent children from their homes, murdering them, dragging them through the streets, laying your feet across their bodies. Nothing can justify what we witnessed. Nothing can justify what we witnessed.
And unlike our ancestors, this time around, we also have a state. And we also have an army. And those terrorists, they don't know what gate of hell they just opened. We're gonna go there and we're gonna smoke them out of their caves and we're gonna take them one after one after one after one. There will be no Hamas after this.
Not just by the atrocities, although that's enough, but by their accomplices. Here in New York, marching in front of my office saying resistance. Let me tell you something, rape is not resistance. Murder is not a political movement. And these people will end where evil always does, on the ashes of history.
That took place in New York, and staying there in the United States, a U.S. expert is warning that fighting between Hamas and Israel in the Middle East will present massive global challenges. Saeed, Associate Dean at New York University Center for Global Affairs, Caroline Kisani, says there are likely no good options in the matter for the United States. She added that much will depend on how Israel fights the war.
Good afternoon. Today, the people of Israel are under attack, orchestrated by a terrorist organization. Hamas. In this moment of tragedy, I want to say to them and to the world and to terrorists everywhere that the United States stands with Israel.
Israel's support is from kind of expected sources. Where it, I think, becomes a big question mark is as the war continues, and we're just very, very early into it, and as the death toll increases, and depending on the means with which, and to date what we've seen is, it's pretty, Israel will be indiscriminate in its violence as it relates to Gaza, and which, again, up to a point, there will be kind of support. But as the Palestinian death toll increases, you can imagine that there will be growing internal domestic opposition across countries that are, putting its support towards Israel.
And Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan is urging Israel to stop bombing Palestinian land and Palestine to stop harassing Israeli civilian settlements. Speaking after a cabinet meeting, Erdogan says Turkey is ready to mediate between Israelis and Palestinians on all fronts, including prisoner swaps, if the sides request it. He added that he had spoken to the Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas and Israeli President Isaac Herzog earlier in the day and expressed his sadness over the deaths of civilians. Erdogan has warned against steps that will escalate tensions further and indicated that Ankara will intensify diplomatic efforts to stop the fighting. He added that Turkey is preparing humanitarian aid for Gaza. Still ahead, Mexico deploys planes to Israel to return nationals. Please join us again. Welcome to the sophomore stretch of today's special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine, with a special focus on the conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas. Joining us this morning is retired U.S. Army Captain, National Defense and Military Strategist, Captain Bish Johnson. Joining us in our Abuja studios for more perspectives on the war. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning and thank you, Olumide, for having me.
It's good to have you. Hamas called their attack on Israel Al-Aqsa flood. Israel described their own counteroffensive as the Operation Swords of Iron. What is your perspective of the state of world peace as these two sides go against each other?
Olumide, the world is at a precipice right now with multiple conflicts in different fronts around the globe. And that speaks again to the positions that I've held earlier of inability of international bodies to be able to contain or prevent some of all these conflicts that we see around the globe. But let me say this. Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. What we saw on Saturday was very barbaric. I don't think there's anything in this world that justifies the use of violence against innocent civilians, whether they are Palestinians or they are Israelis, particularly children, women, and the elderly. So what we witnessed this past weekend was very, very condemnable, and can never be justified for any reason at all.
You say Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. But it was the Palestinian people that elected Hamas as the ruling government against the Fatah regime of Yasser Arafat when he was alive. And now that it has come to this point, can there be made a distinction between Hamas and the people in Gaza?
Well, as you know, Gaza is not the only territory of the Palestinian. If you go to West Bank, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, is in charge over there. Hamas may have been elected by the Palestinians in Gaza, but I doubt how much of that popularity that Hamas still enjoys in the Gaza Strip. The actions that they took this weekend, the repercussions and the after effect of that action is the brunt of it is going to be borne by innocent Palestinians who have absolutely nothing connected to what Hamas did this past weekend. The best way to fight for liberation is not to kill innocent people that have nothing to do with your agitation. And so when I say that they don't speak for the Palestinians. The Palestinian Liberation Organization is the recognized entity that speaks on behalf of the Palestinian people, whether it's at the United Nations or any other international forum. The Hamas is a terrorist organization, and it should be seen as such.
When the events unfolded and they carried out their incursion into the Israeli territory by land, terrestrial, by sea, amphibious, and by air, using hand gliders, obviously it's a long thought out plan, and there was a lot of training involved. Some have blamed or, well, they've pointed out that there was a sort of breakdown in intelligence on the part of the Israelis, whether the military intelligence, Amman, or the internal intelligence network of Shin Bet or Mossad, that it got to this point and it was carried out at such a scale. 1,000 people breaking their defenses, going through their walls, and carrying on this attack for quite a while before there was a response. What is your understanding of what could have, of the breakdown that could have happened?
Well, you know, Olamide, you see, all it takes for these criminals to succeed is just once. But for any security agency to succeed, it will take you 100% of the time to be able to keep your guards. What happened was that the Israelis let loose their guard, particularly this past weekend as they celebrate their Jewish festival, and that was quite unfortunate. For a country that lives in such a hostile environment, I don't think that any time of the year should be taken for granted. You know, maybe they've done it in the past and nothing happened. And so they did it this year, let their guard loose, and then this is the consequences of letting your guard loose. When you find yourself in such an environment, you must keep up your guard at all times, particularly at the 50th anniversary of their Yom Kippur War. So they should have anticipated that something, maybe symbolic is going to happen around that period. And so I don't know how there was such massive intelligence failure on the part of the Israelis to be able to detect that something of this nature will be taking place. Because what happened, the manner in which this incursion was carried out was not something that was just planned in 1 day or 2 days or 1 month. This was an elaborate incursion that required elaborate planning over a period of time, including supply of logistics, because most of those rockets that were fired were never produced in the Gaza Strip. Even if they were produced in the Gaza Strip, they may not have gotten them the components from within Gaza Strip. So there were coordination and planning with outside forces, including the training, as you had rightly pointed out. And so all those things added together, the Israelis ought to have been able to pick up from even one segment of the entire process. Had they picked up from just one segment of the entire process, either supply of logistics or components or training, they would have been able to, if not completely prevent this attack from taking place, but they would have been able to mitigate it or reduce it to the barest minimum.
It raises a very pertinent question that where did they get the supply of weapons from? It has been reported that never at this scale has Hamas been able to muster these sorts of rockets. They say they fired up to 5,000 rockets on the first day. Israel said it was more in the neighborhood of 2,500. But the IDF says that they've used hand-propelled grenades, rocket-propelled grenades, I beg your pardon. They've used all sorts of other weapons. And there are reports that it's possible that some of these weapons were curried from the black market and from out of the war in Ukraine. And accusations that there were some instances at the beginning of the Ukrainian war where some elements were putting some of the weapons being supplied to Ukraine on the black market. And that was a possible source to funnel some of these weapons into the hands of the Hamas.
Well, I think these questions have been posed to both Israeli and the U.S. experts, and their response had been that at this material time, they are focusing on how to stop the incursion, how to free those that have been held hostage, and how to decapitate Hamas so that it's no longer a very potent terrorist organization as it used to be. Look, the source of the weapons that the Hamas had deployed in this incursion may not have and could not have come from just one source. It's possible they could have, gotten one or two of them from the black market, but the elaborate nature of that attack suggests to me that there must be the hands of a state actor that had probably helped these people in assembling all of those equipment. What about the training? Did they also get the training from the black market? No. The planning of it, was it from the black market? No. So I think investigation will reveal at the end of the day where and how they were able to not just only get those weapons, but how they were able to source the funding, because it required money as well, and how they were able to get the training for them to have breached one of the most fortified borders in the world and penetrate into Israel at the manner in which they did, with precision. And in fact, they had elaborate intelligence of military formations, as well as what the civilians were doing at the other side of the border. So in my view, there must be some level of state actor involvement in what has happened in Israel this past weekend.
One of those state actors, of course, will be Iran, who denied any involvement in this attack, although they support Hamas. Obviously, Hezbollah supports Hamas. With your military experience, can you give us an idea of the sort of predicaments the IDF finds itself with having to neutralize the threat of Hamas and at the same time recovering these over 100 hostages, men, women, children? There were octogenarians there, a Holocaust survivor, 80-year-old women, babies. We saw the babies that were abducted with their mothers as well. So how does the IDF go about this matter?
Olumide, this is going to be very, very, very difficult for the Israelis. With these hostages now part of the equation. It would have been a lot more easier to have dealt with this situation if you do not have, hostages that had been, taken back into Gaza as leverage and human shield. I think Hamas knew exactly what he was doing. Their plan was to go in there, inflict as much damage in terms of, lives and treasure on the Israelis, take some people, a reasonable number of Israeli people, citizens hostage, so that they can use them as leverage and they can use them to slow down Israeli incursion into the Gaza Strip, because they know that there will be consequences for their action. And so they planned for it, you know. And part of that plan is to take enough hostages as a human shield and as a bargaining leverage, you know, when the Israelis eventually do respond. You can see the difference between Israeli response now and what their response had been in the previous time that this type similar thing had happened, though not at the magnitude that it happened this weekend. The Israelis are not quick, you know, to carry out land incursion into the Gaza Strip, because of these very reasons that we are talking about right now, because of the hostages that the Palestinians had, you know, that Hamas had taken. Because if they do that, it's possible they may end up killing some of those hostages themselves, or Hamas may begin to execute them like they had, you know, warned that they would do if they go that route. That is why you see them now focusing mostly on area bombardment, you know, targeting some, you know, some facilities and, you know, infrastructures, could be able to degrade the capability of Hamas. Don't be surprised that Hamas may have also booby-trapped the entire city to make land incursion or to slow it down, or to make it difficult or to slow it down. So that is the scenario that the Israelis find themselves. It's a nightmare scenario. It's a very complicated scenario. It's a very, very difficult scenario for any military commander to find himself in.
And to another difficult question, as regards public global perception of the war, never since the invasion of Ukraine by Russia has attention shifted away from that conflict to the Middle East in this fashion. And that's why on Russian invasion of Ukraine, this program, we had no choice but to focus on the Middle East. We heard from the president of Venezuela saying that he supports the Palestinian cause, mentioning Mahmoud Abbas and saying that the Palestinians have a right to express their disdain against the Israelis and the occupation of the Israelis and what have you. And we have the British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. We have the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. We have President Joe Biden saying that they stand with Israel. But at the same time, we have countries in the Middle East saying that they understand and they stand with Hamas. This is a polarizing time. How do you think this can be resolved? And can the United Nations at this point do anything?
Well, it's quite unfortunate. What you're seeing playing out in terms of who to support is the support, you know, following these similar, you know, traditional allies, you know, an enemy of my enemy is my friend. That is why you see Maduro supporting the Palestinians, because now the U.S. is on this side. And so they will align themselves in the same way they have aligned themselves, you know, with the Russian and Ukraine war. Of course, the Arab nations will traditionally support their Arab brothers. Now, what the UN can do? I don't think that the UN can do anything. The UN has never been able to do anything in instances like this. The most that the UN can do is to be able to bargain for, you know, delivery of humanitarian services into the Gaza Strip, so that the people will have food and water and medicine and stuff like that. But as far as like getting anything serious or tangible from the UN, I don't see that happening. Instead, it may have to come from, you know, countries like Qatar, you know, or any of all these Arab nations or Mid-Eastern countries that have some level of influence over Hamas. But for the UN, I don't think that UN can do much in that respect.
Captain Bish Johnson, we thank you for your analysis at this difficult time for the Middle East, this difficult time for the world.
Thank you very much, Olumide, for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
Captain Bish Johnson is a retired U.S. Army captain, the national defense and military strategist that joined us from Abuja. Now, the Mexican army is carrying out humanitarian flights aimed at bringing home its nationals from Israel, and the attack on the country by the Palestinian Islamist group Hamas. An unknown number of hostages were taken by Hamas after it launched a surprise attack in Israel on Saturday. Foreign Minister Alicia Worrisome says 2 Mexicans are believed to have been amongst those taken by the group. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador said on Monday in a press conference 2 humanitarian flights to retrieve Mexicans would leave for Israel. According to López Obrador, some 5,000 Mexican nationals are in Israel and some 300 have asked to leave. Londoners have gathered on Downing Street to show their support for Israel 2 days after Hamas' surprise attack. Demonstrators held signs reading, "I stand with Israel," and 7th October 2023, the day the most Jews have been killed since the Holocaust. A protester by the name Dan Cohen says the conflict is not about proportion of land, but is a war of religion and religious supremacy. More than 10 Britons are feared dead or missing in Israel, according to officials, although Foreign Minister James Cleverly said he will not speculate on the number of British or dual nationals in the area. The leaders of the United States, Britain, France, and Germany are expected to discuss the situation in Israel and the Palestinian territories.
Just open your eyes. Just open your eyes and don't listen to all the fake news you see online. Every story has 2 sides.
I want them to be really strong with the EU and with the allies around aid that goes to the Palestinian Authority and the United Nations into the education system. After winning the war, the education system has to be changed. That's what I want to happen. It's one thing taking Hamas and destroying them, but then you've got a nation that's been brought up on hate. And after World War II, we had denazification across Europe, all the schools, and in Japan also. We have to change the education system if we're going to win the peace. I came here to stand with Israel, who's got to fight a war in order to make a peace.
Today we saw the true face of the Free Palestine movement. I think today everybody saw that it's nothing to do with coexistence or land, and everything to do with wanting to wipe out the Jewish state and every Jew inside it. I think everybody has seen why we have a border fence now, why we need soldiers, and why we don't have peace. And it's nothing to do with land, it's nothing to do with this proportion of land or that proportion of land, or access to holy sites, all of which we have offered to the Palestinians 5 times already. It's not a war over land, it's a war over religion and religious supremacy, and one side not willing to compromise.
Meanwhile, destruction continues in Gaza as Israeli airstrikes continue to bombard the enclave. People in Gaza City are searching through the rubble of destroyed buildings and sitting inside damaged buildings today following airstrikes. Gaza's health ministry said at least 687 Palestinians had been killed and 3,726 wounded in Israel airstrikes on the blockaded enclave since Saturday. Apartment blocks, a mosque and hospitals are among the sites attacked, and the strikes destroyed some roads and houses, according to media reports and eyewitnesses. Israeli TV channels say the death toll from the Hamas attack had climbed to 900 Israelis, with at least 2,600 injured and dozens taken captive. Israeli Zaka Rescue Services retrieved over 100 bodies from the small Israeli community of Be'eri near the border with the Gaza Strip. A kibbutz, or collective farm, is amongst the worst hit of the 14 Israeli border communities overrun by Hamas terrorists. Local media say more than 100 residents were killed, and that amounted to some 10% of its population. An Israeli military spokesperson said troops responding to Saturday's mass infiltration killed between 70 and 100 gunmen in or around the area. Now joining us is Nigeria's former ambassador to Switzerland, Ambassador Joseph Ayalogu, speaking to us from our Abuja studios in north-central Nigeria. Thank you for making out the time to be with us.
Yeah, thank you, Olumide.
I'm so glad that, yes, good morning, sir. I'm so glad you're here because for your perspective and your insight in these sorts of issues and with your experience worldwide. When you saw the images of the children that were dragged into Gaza, the women that were abused, children abused, the elderly women, the infirm, the physically challenged that were taken into Gaza, and the manner in which they were taken, and the number of people that had been killed, what was your first thought?
Well, that of shock. These acts of inhumanity tend to shock people, and I was definitely shocked. Also very worried because I know there are bound to be consequences, and sad again that the Israel-Palestinian crisis have festered for decades now, and we don't seem to have a lasting solution to it. So that is it, sad.
Now, nationals from the Philippines are either missing or killed. Britons either missing or killed. Cambodians either missing or killed. We understand about 11 Americans now said to be killed. As of yesterday, it was 9 to 11 Americans confirmed to be killed by Hamas in this incident. What sort of scenario does that present for the United States and for Britain and for these nations where their nationals have been killed in this affair? Especially, I want you to focus on the United States for now. Do they have will there be a tendency for them to assist their natural ally Israel in a more comprehensive way than they've been doing?
Yeah, well, we can see that the collection of countries indicates the growing internationality of that region. People go for religious and tourist reasons. Well, for the U.S., of course, we know there's a very strong relationship between Israel and the U.S. A lot of Israelis are actually U.S. citizens and so on. So there is bound to be a tendency to support Israel, especially as we are considering that what we have is an action by a terrorist group that has been so described. So the only way forward is for the U.S. to give us much support, help that will be needed by Israel. And they're already doing that. The political supports have been voiced by the president, and I'm sure that whatever needs in terms of humanitarian supplies and so on will be given to Israel. But again, it's happening on both sides now, the humanitarian issues. So the world would have to look at both sides and offer what will be needed. But I think at the end of the day, we need to get to the root of the problem and try to deal with them.
Do you fear that the United States will be dragged into the conflict in a military way? The United States State Department say that they have moved a Navy carrier closer to Israel and fighter jets closer to Israel because of the death of these United States citizens. There was a time where if a citizen of the United States perished in this manner, the reprisal will be instant and very fearful. And many nations were wary of involving United States nationals, not to talk of Israeli nationals, in this sort of conflict. Is there a danger or is there a chance that the United States will face agitation from within the United States to take a more combative approach against Hamas?
Well, the fear again is further militarization of the area because, you know, there are definitely some groups, even state actors, that are supporting the Hamas, and it wouldn't be a very good thing to see a lot more escalation of the military angle. But of course, the U.S. takes its responsibility to protect its sovereign, nationals seriously. So we're not surprised that it's moving arms, well, moving the battleship very close to watch things and to see whether there would be, I would say that their purpose would be to see whether there will be any specific need to help Israel. Israel on its own tend to know how to pull its own punches, so I'm sure they are doing as much as, they're giving as much as they get. So maybe not too much of the U.S. Specific input will be required. But it's good to make those, it's interesting that they're making those moves, even if for the purpose of having an effect, body language.
Now, Hamas have explained the Palestinian position as that of the eventual reaction to years of occupation, years of denial of their human rights by the Israelis, years of the blockade. By the way, now the blockade is worse because there's a food blockade, electricity blockade, fuel blockade. We heard the Israeli Defense Minister Gallant saying that that was how they will be treated until this affair is sorted out. But these considerations of the Palestinians and of Hamas is what precipitated this act of theirs that started on Saturday. Is it justifiable?
Well, we know the background to the crisis there. Israelites were away for a long time, and then they came back in 1946 or thereabout and occupied a territory that Palestinians feel should be theirs. Of course, we've all agreed that these territories are not exclusive to Palestine. That is at the root of the problem. Issue of land, issue of territorial ownership. It hasn't been resolved, even though there are, of course, after the Yom Kippur War and Israel spread beyond what was the perceived borders then into the Gaza Strip, it has continued to fester. I am not surprised that nobody should be surprised that the Hamas or the Palestinians like how they are treated, and nothing has made them or been given to them to make them stop the way they feel. At the end of the day, that's what the world must really address. There are these tendencies to build settlements here and there. It's definitely a problem. So the two countries are living in a high wire, tense situation. They all have rights to the claims they make. But where one oversteps the other, there has to be a third party to really decide that this would be the way to go. Incidentally, at times, even the third party efforts, especially by the UN, have not helped matters.
I wish we had more time for more discussions on this, but we thank you so far for the light that you've shed on this matter. Ambassador Joseph Ayalogu, Nigeria's former ambassador to Switzerland, who joined us from Abuja.
Thank you.
Now to the Russia-Ukraine crisis. A disused Armenian textile factory has become a sanctuary for artists and other immigrants from Russia, Iran, and Ukraine whose lives have been turned upside down by war or political turmoil. Abandoned workshops that once produced Soviet knitwear have been turned into a creative space for painters, puppet makers, and photographers, an venture that is helping to revitalize a town in decline. Launched in 2022, the project, called Abistan Shelter in Armenian, is open to participants and guests from around the world.
it was abandoned school when in Soviet times. When it became fabric factory, so it got abandoned again. And 1 year ago, Tumanian Foundation of this town, small town, gave this place to Russian people who was running from a war, so they can live here and it will be like a shelter for them. And that's the name. Abastan in Armenian means shelter.
If I want to compare to Iran, I feel that we are more sad there, that we are completely paralyzed by bad news. And for me, it was last year, was like 6 months just reading news and paralyzed and think you couldn't do anything except, I mean, all the artists were thinking that we are united to do something for the movement, for the Versailles Revolution. So it's good. You can do it in, when you are sad and upset. It gives you some possibility and some creation. But here, the thing is, all the people are so alive. The thing is, all your friends and relatives, like maybe in Russia, all of them just are in different places in the world. We are not in same place anymore. And it feels that your home is not your home. Maybe you understand.
Finally, local residents of the small Ukrainian village of Worrisome on Monday wept next to coffins as they buried relatives and neighbors after a Russian missile slammed into a village cafe and killed at least 52 people. The small village community in the southeastern Kharkiv region was devastated by one of the deadliest missile strikes of the war after a Russian Iskander missile hit the cafe where people gathered to mourn a fallen Ukrainian soldier. After DNA tests, 11 bodies were handed out to family members on Monday. The village, which had a population of 500 before the war, was seized by Russia in the early days of the invasion and was recaptured by Kyiv in September 2022, along with neighboring areas. That's it on today's special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine with a bias for the conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Thank you for watching.